Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going on a magical journey, learning English through a fairy tale. Fairy tales are fun stories that help us learn new words and understand how to use them. They use simple vocabulary and tell exciting stories that are easy to follow. By listening to fairy tales, you can improve your English listening skills and vocabulary. The fairy tale we're going to tell today is The Little Red Riding Hood. Are you ready to hear the story? Let's go. The story begins. Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a little girl named Red Riding Hood. She was called this because she always wore a beautiful red cloak with a hood. The cloak was a gift from her grandmother, and she loved it so much that she wore it every day. People in the village loved her very much because she was kind, cheerful, and always ready to help others. One sunny morning, Little Red Riding Hood's mother asked her to do something very important.
Red Riding Hood, your grandmother is not feeling well today. Can you take this basket of food to her?
Her mother asked, handing her a basket full of delicious food, bread, butter, and honey.
Of course, Mother. I will go right away.
Little Red Riding Hood said happily. She was always happy to visit her grandmother because Grandma's house was in the woods, and she loved walking through the beautiful trees and smelling the flowers. Before she left, her mother gave her some important advice.
Remember, my dear, don't talk to strangers in the woods. There are some people who may not have good intentions. Just go straight to Grandma's house and don't stop along the way.
Little Red Riding Hood promised her mother that she would be careful. She picked up the basket, waved goodbye, and began walking toward her grandmother's house. The path to Grandma's house went through a dense forest. The trees were tall and full of green leaves that shaded the ground. It was peaceful in the forest, and Little Red Riding Hood could hear the birds singing in the trees. As she walked, she thought about her grandmother, who was always so kind and caring. Little Red Riding Hood loved her grandmother's house. It was small, cozy, and filled with the scent of fresh flowers. Grandma always had the best stories to tell. Little Red Riding Hood couldn't wait to give her the basket of food and hear some of her grandmother's wonderful tales. As she walked deeper into the forest, she didn't notice a dark shadow lurking behind the trees. It was the wolf. The wolf was sneaky and clever. He liked to trick people and make them scared. When he saw Little Red Riding Hood walking through the woods, he had a clever idea. The wolf stepped out of the shadows and approached the little girl. She was surprised but was not afraid because she was so friendly.
Hello, little girl.
The wolf said in a smooth, low voice.
Where are you going?
Little Red Riding Hood, being a kind and trusting child, smiled and replied,
I'm on my way to my grandmother's house to bring her some food. She is not feeling well.
Your grandmother's house?
The wolf thought for a moment. He had a plan in mind, but he needed more information.
Why don't you pick some beautiful flowers for your grandmother?
He suggested.
She would love them, and you would make her even happier.
Little Red Riding Hood liked this idea. She loved flowers, and she knew that her grandmother would be delighted to receive a bunch of them. So she decided to stop for a while and pick some flowers. The wolf, on the other hand, had other plans. While Little Red Riding Hood was picking flowers, the wolf ran quickly through the forest, knowing a shortcut to Grandma's house. The wolf reached Grandma's house in no time. He knocked on the door, and when Grandma opened it, he quickly pushed his way inside. Grandma was frightened but didn't have time to scream. The wolf locked her in the closet, put on her clothes, and climbed into her bed, pretending to be her. The wolf thought,
When Little Red Riding Hood comes, she will never recognize me. I will trick her, and she will bring me the basket of food.
Meanwhile, Little Red Riding Hood was happily picking flowers, completely unaware of what was happening at her grandmother's house. She was so excited to bring the beautiful flowers to her grandmother. The sun was shining brightly, and the birds were singing louder than ever. She finished picking the flowers and continued down the path, excited to give her grandmother the basket of food and the flowers. As Little Red Riding Hood approached her grandmother's house, she noticed that the door was slightly open. This was unusual because Grandma always made sure to lock the door. Little Red Riding Hood pushed the door open gently and called,
Grandma, I'm here.
no answer. Grandma?
She called again, this time stepping inside.
Little Red Riding Hood noticed that the house was unusually quiet. She walked towards Grandma's bedroom, where the door was closed. She could hear someone inside, but they were not answering. This was strange. Grandma was usually so welcoming and happy to see her. She knocked softly on the bedroom door.
Grandma, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood.
Come in, my dear.
Said a strange voice from inside. Little Red Riding Hood opened the door and walked in, holding the basket of food and the flowers. She stopped in surprise when she saw Grandma lying in bed. At first, she thought Grandma looked strange, but she couldn't understand why.
Grandma, you look different today.
Little Red Riding Hood said, taking a step closer.
Oh, my dear, I am not feeling well.
The wolf replied in a raspy voice, trying to sound like Grandma. He was lying under the covers, only his face visible.
I am feeling very tired today.
Little Red Riding Hood took another step closer.
But, Grandma, what big eyes you have.
All the better to see you with, my dear.
Said the wolf, smiling slyly. Little Red Riding Hood was still a bit confused, but she didn't think too much about it. She went closer still, feeling worried for her grandmother.
Grandma, what big ears you have.
All the better to hear you with, my dear.
Replied the wolf.
Grandma, what big teeth you have.
Little Red Riding Hood said, now standing next to the bed, looking more carefully at her grandmother. She was starting to feel that something was very wrong.
All the better to eat you with, my dear.
The wolf suddenly jumped up from the bed and leapt toward Little Red Riding Hood. She screamed and ran out of the room as fast as she could. The wolf chased her through the house, but Little Red Riding Hood was quick and managed to escape out the door. She ran as fast as her legs would carry her, straight back to her mother's house. Just as she was about to run into the woods to safety, a woodsman who had been passing by heard her screams. He ran to her rescue and quickly entered the house. He found the wolf sleeping in Grandma's bed, and managed to free Grandma from the closet. The woodsman and Grandma were very relieved. Grandma thanked the woodsman for saving her. Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson that day. She realized that even when she was friendly, she needed to be more careful, especially when meeting strangers. Key vocabulary: hood dash. A covering for the head. Example: Little Red Riding Hood wore a red hood to protect her head from the cold. Stranger: a person you don't know. Example: Little Red Riding Hood was told not to talk to strangers in the woods. Sneaky: doing something in a way that others don't notice. Example: the wolf was sneaky when he tricked Little Red Riding Hood. Knocked: to hit a door to get someone's attention. Example: the wolf knocked on Grandma's door to enter her house. Practicing listening. Let's listen to part of the story again. Pay close attention to these words: hood, stranger, sneaky, and knocked. I will ask you a few questions afterward. Now, listen carefully. Can you answer these questions? What did Little Red Riding Hood wear on her head? Who did Little Red Riding Hood meet in the woods? What did the wolf do when he reached Grandma's house? Conclusion. Great job! You learned some new words today: hood, stranger, sneaky, and knocked. Try using these words in your own sentences. For example, I met a stranger at the park today. Or, the sneaky wolf tricked the girl. Now you can listen to the story again and practice the words. Remember, learning English can be fun with fairy tales.